this video is going to be a little bit different than my typical travel vlog because today I want to talk about my experience meeting up with a local tribe here in the Philippines called the Ati tribe. And to give a little bit, well, first I want to give a little bit of a backstory about how I was able to meet them and what led to this day. And I also want to explain a little bit about who the Ati people are. First, I want to take it back to when I was in Iloilo City for the Dinigang Festival. If you haven't seen my video about this where we explained a little bit what it was and showed what the Dinigang Festival is, basically this is supposed to be a celebration of the local Ati people, and how they celebrate is by having a parade mixed with a dance competition. High school students gather and form groups representing their school, and they pretty much spend all year choreographing a dance and perform it in front of different groups of judges, and then at the end there's a winner announced, and it's a very prideful competition. So when Pema and I heard about this festival, we reached out to the organization that is in charge of putting it on, and we applied for media passes so we can have front row access to film and document the dances. And while we were in the media section, I sat next to this guy named Vin, and Vin is a photographer, and he lives in a place called Posse City, which is about an hour outside of Iloilo. And we were talking with him. He was just giving us so much information about the local culture, and we bonded over photography, and he was a really cool guy. So we became friends with him. A couple days later, he actually came back to the city to meet up with us. He showed us around some typical things to do in Iloilo. I made a video about that where we did things like ate La Paz Bat Choy, which is a local soup that is native to Iloilo. That's where it started. So it was really cool to hang out with a local. And that's one of the things I always love to do when I travel, is to meet local people and learn about what they enjoy doing. So Vin ended up inviting us to stay with him at his family's home. So a few days later, we ended up going out to Posse City. We stayed with him. He introduced us to his wife, his grandmother, his daughter, and we had a great day staying with him. And while we were there, he was recommending we go to the island of Boracay, which is about 6 hours away from where he lived. And Boracay is one of the most popular islands in the Philippines for tourism. Boracay is mostly just mass tourism. They just flock in together, and that is great for the local economy because it supplies locals with jobs. It brings massive amounts of money to the island, and of course that can be really good for people who own businesses there. But for us, when we arrived in Boracay, it wasn't that positive of an experience. I actually made a whole video. If you haven't seen that already, I made a video summarizing our experience. You can check that out. And we share our honest opinions, and I also gave a little guide and some insights, travel tips, things like that about Boracay. But anyway, what I was saying was we met Vin's family. We stayed with him for a day, which was really cool. And he introduced us to his wife, Gian, who is actually related to someone who is a member of the Ati tribe. And that was really interesting. So they suggested we go meet up with them. And of course, we took them up upon that offer. And I think it was our second or third day in Boracay, we met up with a man by the name of Pastor Martinez. And he was telling us how on the island of Boracay, there is a small local Ati village, but where he lives is actually off of the island, right on the mainland in Caticlan. And that's where we ended up going because there's a bigger village there, and he suggested we go there. And we had such a positive experience meeting the local people who live in the Ati village. And I always say I love to connect with locals, and this was probably one of the coolest experiences we've had because we left the tourist-filled place, and so close to that was the complete contrast of what it's like to be in a tourist destination. And it's so close, and it just made me think about so many different things. And one, it's a little unfortunate because the Ati tribe are the indigenous people of that land. They are the indigenous people of the Visayas region, which is the central area of the Philippines. and unfortunately they've kind of been pushed around for many decades. We learned a little bit about their way of life and a history about their people and their villages, and they were telling us how they've been pretty nomadic people, and not always by choice. There has been a lot of conflict with people pushing them out of their land, and the Ati people are pretty peaceful and nice, and they try to avoid conflict at all costs, so they're not ones to really get involved with fighting, and if someone demands they leave, typically they will. And that's exactly what happened on the island of Boracay. So now, as I was explaining, how Boracay is just filled with tourists because not too long ago, a bunch of business owners and wealthy people came in and started making hotels and resorts, and now it is all focused on tourism, which doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but for the Ati people, it kind of was, because they were forced out of their native land. And it's just so interesting to meet people that were forced out of their land and are still just so happy and thankful for what they have now.
I'm so very lucky, and I'm happy that I am one to live here in this land.
And they were explaining how now they actually own the land where they are, so they're not going to be kicked out. Recently, a few years ago, a missionary from the States actually came to that area of the Philippines and started helping the local people, and eventually bought them plots of land to where now they own that land. They have the rights to that land. And as I keep saying, it's just so interesting to learn about their way of life, because to me it's very different to how I was raised. So I love being exposed to different cultures and being welcomed, and I just felt so welcome and so safe there. I never had a doubt in my mind about safety, and just the way, even the way strangers in the village looked at me, it was just with smiles, and it was so positive, not any way negative. They were just such nice people. We ended up learning how their education system is now starting to ramp up, but that's just such a recent thing, and it made me think about how some of the people where I'm from take education for granted, when we have public schools with such great facilities, and we just don't appreciate it as much. And they are just now starting to get education, formal education in place, because they were explaining how traditionally people wouldn't have the time or resources available to go to school. The kids would work because they were focused on living and surviving and growing and catching food, and it's just now they're basically able to start learning in a formal manner. As a Western foreigner, it's always really eye-opening to learn about that. I don't know, a lot of people come to these tourist destinations and they'll never get to experience something like this. So that's one of the reasons I want to talk about this today, is because I think there's a way where it can be possible to incorporate some of the cultural experiences in the tourist destinations. And right now, the way Boracay is set up, there's nothing cultural about it. It is a beautiful beach, and it's all about the beautiful environment, and they actually shut it down. They shut the entire island down last year for 6 months for rehabilitation, as there was some corruption going on and some controversial issues with big resorts dumping their sewage into the ocean, and that's a whole other topic that I'm not going to really get into right now. But going to Boracay, while it is a very beautiful place, there's nothing cultural about it, and the typical traveler, the typical visitor, the typical tourist will never get to experience what I just got to experience. And I see that as a little unfortunate, and I think that can change. I don't necessarily know how that can be implemented, but just the way I was treated in the local Ati village was so welcoming. I want to go back there. I want to meet more local tribes, and I really want to dive more into local cultures. Immersing yourself in a local culture can really change the way you perceive the world, and if more people start doing that, I think more positive effects will happen. And this is just me rambling. I don't necessarily have a solution to any of this, But maybe in Boracay, if there are some organizations set up that focus a little less on just profiting from tourists, it can be a better experience. And I don't really think there's anything set up right now where people can go and visit the Ati tribe. We were actually lucky enough to meet Vin, who connected us with his wife's relative, who was the pastor of the village. So we kind of had that unique way of getting in there, but that's not something that's very common. So it's unfortunate that a lot of people will never experience that. Anyway, I just wanted to share this with you because hopefully I get to do this more. That was just one day. We only went there for one afternoon for a few hours. So, I only captured a little bit of footage and us meeting the locals, and we even, just saw their way of life and how they were just very positive people and just thankful to have the land they live. It was really cool. So, essentially, I guess the moral behind this story is, if you travel and if you ever get the opportunity to meet some locals, by all means, I would highly suggest doing that, and try to go a little bit outside of the normal tourist areas, the normal tourist path. And it was really unique for us because we went to like the most popular tourist destination in the Philippines, yet we still had this local experience. So hopefully I'll be able to capture more of that and experience more of that myself, and bring you along for some of those adventures. So if you're not already, I'd really appreciate if you subscribe to this channel. Pema also has a YouTube channel herself. You can check that out. The link will be in the description. And also, if you have any other information about how I can connect with more locals, I would really appreciate if you could share that with me. Maybe make some suggestions. Where do you think we should go? If you know anything about the Philippines, and if you know how we can connect with more locals like that, that was really that's like my ideal experience right there. Of course, I make videos showing tourist destinations and advice for other travelers, because that's something that's common to do, but I like to mix it up every once in a while and share videos like this too. So hopefully I can do this again very soon. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you think of this Ati experience. Actually, real quick before we get away from that, one thing I forgot to mention is what I brought up in the beginning. The reason we even had the opportunity to meet with the Ati tribe was because we attended the Dinigyang festival. And this is really interesting because the Dinigyang festival is supposed to be a celebration of the Ati people. Yet, when I asked some of the Ati people what they thought of this celebration, they did not really have many positive things to say about it.
In my personal, I am not happy.
Yeah.
Because that is not Ati dance. In the truth, there is no connection in Ati.
It doesn't really benefit them in any way. Like I said, it's a dance competition. So local high school students gather together and they put on these colorful and extravagant outfits and dance around and put on these choreographed dances, yet that's really not at all what the Ati life is like. They don't wear these colorful outfits like that. They don't dance around like that. They do have cultural celebrations and ceremonies that are traditional, but it's really nothing like what you see in the Dinigyang festival. So it's just really interesting to see how the Filipinos, who are not the indigenous people, celebrate the indigenous people. It's just funny. I guess I'll leave it on that. Hopefully I can learn some more about the indigenous people of the Philippines and more about the indigenous people around other places of the world, because to me that's really interesting. So all right, ramble over. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.